I never want to hurt our farmers. Our farmers are great people. They keep us happy and healthy and fat.
With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they're in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine, and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration change.
We would have to cut back our production or, worst case scenario, shut down the farm.
Chapter 12, Bankruptcies. A program designed specifically for American farmers and fishermen surged by 55% compared to 2023. It wasn't a Wall Street crash. It wasn't a stock market spiral. It was something quieter, deeper, and closer to home, a silent wave wiping out generational farms across Iowa, Kansas, and the Dakotas. At the same time, U.S. grain and feed exports plummeted, leaving silos full and contracts unrenewed. But just across the northern border, the story was reversed. Canada's agri-food exports jumped by 22.5% between late 2024 and March 2025, according to the Government of Canada's International Trade Division. While American supply chains stalled in ports and courtrooms, Canadian farmers were signing deals in Seoul, Manila, and Jakarta. The message was unmistakable. While Washington locked itself into a tariff war, Ottawa quietly took over the lunch line. For decades, American agriculture stood as a symbol of abundance. You didn't have to be from Iowa or Kansas to picture it: wide-open fields, golden harvests, towering silos, and convoys of grain trucks heading toward rail lines and global markets. It was a national myth that sold itself, America feeds the world. But by mid-2025, that image has started to crack. Now those same silos aren't being emptied, they're being sealed shut. Not because there's no food, but because there's no movement. At ports from Savannah to Long Beach, meat containers once destined for Seoul, Manila, or Dubai are sitting in direct sunlight waiting for export permits that never arrive. Some are flagged for inspection, others simply have no assigned ship. In refrigerated storage units, tens of millions of dollars in pork, beef, and poultry are quietly rotting, turning a symbol of American productivity into waste. Grain elevators across the Midwest have issued hold orders because there's nowhere left to send the crop. The supply chain isn't just congested, it's stalled. This wasn't caused by a natural disaster or foreign sanctions. It's the result of policy drift, tariff fatigue, and logistical breakdowns. Since 2023, ongoing disputes over steel, aluminum, and agricultural levies have led to one thing: buyers backing away. Contracts get harder to secure, freight insurance goes up, and trusted long-term partners like the Philippines and South Korea are now quietly pivoting toward Australia, Canada, and even Russia. These shifts don't make headlines, but they do make market share disappear. So what's left behind? Empty schedules, full storage bins, and a bitter realization the strength of American agriculture was never just in what it produced, it was in who trusted it. And in 2025, that trust is evaporating. The headlines speak in numbers, but the story underneath is one of slow, painful erosion. Across the American heartland, 2025 has not brought a drought or a flood. It has brought something far more dangerous: disbelief. For the first time in decades, buyers around the world are no longer sure that American agriculture can deliver. Nowhere is this collapse more symbolic than in wheat. At the end of May 2025, net new wheat orders fell to minus 4,900 metric tons. That figure isn't just bad, it's historically telling. A negative order book means that more contracts were canceled than signed. In other words, buyers didn't just hesitate, they walked away. Wheat, once a backbone of U.S. export power, is now sitting idle while Asian and Middle Eastern buyers turn to newer, more predictable partners. The soybean market tells a similar story, only this time it's a changing of the guard. American farmers are now selling soybeans at just 10 per bushel, down from around $15 at the end of 2023. That's barely above the break-even point of $9.65, leaving almost no margin for profit. Meanwhile, Brazil has captured up to 74% of the Asian soybean market, shipping high-quality grain at a better price with fewer political strings. The U.S., once the dominant player, has been reduced to just 2% export growth, a number that barely keeps pace with inflation, much less competition. Even once booming niche crops like sorghum haven't escaped the downturn. In the first 60 days of 2025, U.S. sorghum exports collapsed by 94%, turning grain silos into graveyards. What was supposed to be high-demand biofuel or livestock feed is now being stored indefinitely. Farmers describe it as ghost grain grown, harvested, cleaned, but with nowhere to go. Freight rates are too high, foreign demand has dried up, and ethanol refineries are slowing operations. It's a quiet collapse. No headlines, no bailouts, just dust gathering on unused machinery. And then there's the meat industry, where the crisis isn't just real, it's visible. More than 1,000 American meat plants have had their export licenses suspended in early 2025, cutting off access to international markets overnight. Containers of frozen pork and beef are piling up in major ports, and the cost of keeping them refrigerated has tripled from $400 to $1,200 per container. With exports stalled and storage at capacity farms have had to act fast. Many are reducing their livestock herds by as much as 40% simply because they can't afford to feed animals that no longer have a destination. Meanwhile, consumers are caught in a paradox. In cities, supermarkets are dropping prices in a desperate attempt to move excess stock. But in rural towns where distribution is more expensive and trucking is less available, meat prices are actually rising. It's a case of plenty turning into pain. Oversupply meets broken logistics, and both farmers and families are paying the price.
This is a strawberry field in Ventura County, California. I'm in Oxnard. This is one of the beating hearts of the Californian agricultural economy. California's economy is the fourth largest economy in the world, and the agricultural industry here is literally worth billions of dollars. There are thousands of farms in Ventura County, tens of thousands of farm workers, and this also happens to be the latest location in a series of immigration enforcement actions by the Trump administration and federal agents. Yesterday, video emerged and reports emerged of ICE chasing farm workers in fields just like this.
While headlines in the U.S. fixated on silo backups and frozen meat containers, Canada was moving in silence and upward. From the outside, nothing dramatic seemed to change. No flashy infrastructure projects, no billion-dollar bailouts, no crisis meetings aired on television. But behind the numbers, a quiet agricultural takeover was unfolding. In late 2024, Canada's agri-food exports surged by 22.5%, according to the country's official trade data. In just 3 months, this silent momentum shifted Canada's global role from reliable supplier to opportunistic leader. And the most striking part, they didn't have to invent a new strategy. They simply filled the vacuum America left behind. During Q1 2025, Canada's total goods exports grew 1.6% compared to the previous quarter, a solid figure in a season of global economic uncertainty. But what really powered that growth wasn't oil minerals or lumber, it was agriculture. From wheat to lentils, beef to canola, Canadian shipments picked up speed precisely when U.S. exporters stalled. The gap created by American policy turbulence was quickly absorbed by Canadian producers without needing to add a single new shipping terminal or grain elevator. This wasn't a tale of innovation. It was one of consistency. Canada didn't try to reinvent global agriculture. It just showed up on time, delivered what it promised, and avoided the tariff wars that crippled its southern neighbor. As U.S. contracts were canceled or left in limbo, Canadian suppliers stepped in with stable prices, straightforward paperwork, and trust, that increasingly rare commodity in global trade. And so, while Washington scrambled to make sense of its export collapse, Ottawa simply stood still and let the markets come to them. The American farm collapse didn't begin in the soil. It began with signatures on tariff sheets, executive orders, and retaliatory agreements. By 2025, Washington had imposed sweeping new tariffs ranging from 25% to 54% on imports from China, Canada, and Mexico. The goal was clear: protect American industries and rebuild domestic strength. But the outcome? A global chain reaction that backfired especially on U.S. agriculture. Faced with new barriers, many countries retaliated not by attacking American technology or cars, but by going straight for its most vulnerable pressure point: farm exports. Within months, duties on American soybeans, wheat, sorghum, and pork began to climb. Buyers in Asia and Europe quietly shifted to alternative suppliers. And with each lost contract, the trust once placed in U.S. agricultural supply chains eroded further. It wasn't just about price anymore. It was about reliability, and America's global reputation was faltering. By mid-2025, the damage was no longer theoretical. The U.S. had lost an estimated $27 billion in export value, much of it tied directly to food and agricultural products. The federal government scrambled to contain the fallout. Emergency aid programs were announced and checks were cut: $23 billion in direct farmer support and followed by an additional $10 billion in late spring adjustments. But even these massive sums couldn't patch the deeper hole: the global perception that America was no longer a stable agricultural partner. What had started as a bold economic play to gain leverage had turned into a political boomerang. The very communities that had once cheered the tariffs Midwestern Farmers State Agricultural Board's rural unions were now the ones asking the hardest questions. Who are we selling to now? Why are our contracts gone? Where did our markets go? And the most painful question of all, did we do this to ourselves? By early 2025, the world wasn't just rethinking American agriculture, it was actively rewriting the rules to avoid it. In Asia, a silent shift was underway. Major U.S. partners like South Korea and the Philippines began rerouting long-standing food contracts away from America, opting instead for Russia, Australia, and Canada. These weren't symbolic moves, they were survival strategies. What changed? Not just price, but trust. Korean importers began insisting on origin flexibility clauses, legal guarantees allowing them to switch suppliers at the last minute if U.S. deliveries got delayed or canceled. That's not normal practice. It's what buyers do when they no longer believe a supplier can be counted on. At the same time, America's logistics network started to crack under pressure. While farm exports dried up, ports weren't idle, they were jammed. The Port of Los Angeles reported a 20% drop in outbound agricultural shipments, and Portland saw a staggering 51% decline, turning once busy terminals into silent yards. Containers stacked up with nowhere to go, while the cost of a single outbound refrigerated container surged, pricing many mid-sized farms out of the market entirely. No shipments meant no payments, and no payments meant a growing debt crisis in the Farm Belt. With razor-thin margins, many farmers rely on rolling seasonal credit, but in 2025, banks began tightening that access. Why? Because missed contracts and unsold stock aren't just business risks. They're red flags. More farmers began defaulting on their notes. In a cruel spiral, the system began to eat itself. No exports, no revenue. No revenue, no repayment, no future. It wasn't just about crops anymore. It was about confidence. Confidence that vanished faster than the grain ever moved. While farmers went silent and exporters scrambled, it was ordinary Americans who felt the next punch in the supermarket aisle. By April 2025, the price of basic canned foods, beans, tuna, vegetables had jumped 12.6% in just 4 months. Not because of a food shortage, but because of metal tariffs. Washington's decision to increase duties on imported steel and aluminum, originally aimed at boosting domestic production, had a ripple effect far beyond factories. The cost of canning materials soared. Tin can lids alone rose by 27%, forcing processors and retailers to pass the costs directly to consumers. Suddenly, working families across America were paying more, not for what's inside the can, but for the can itself. This isn't theoretical inflation. It's felt in every grocery haul, every school lunch, every food pantry donation. And it's not a result of foreign manipulation or weather shocks. It's a direct consequence of trade policy made in D.C., but paid for at the checkout line. When the price of packaging exceeds the food it contains, something is deeply broken. And so the chart tells a cruel story, a perfect divergence. On one end, U.S. agriculture is unraveling. Credit lines are tightening. Bankruptcies are climbing. Silo doors are being welded shut, not because they're full, but because no one wants what's inside. Farms are defaulting. Machinery sits idle. The myth of American agricultural dominance is fading, replaced by a grim new normal survival. On the other end, Canada is soaring. With no need for dramatic reforms or flashy subsidies, Canada simply stood still and watched the market swing in its favor. In just one quarter, its agri-food exports rose 22.5%, powered by stable logistics, modern ports, and policy consistency. While American produce sat in limbo, Canadian goods moved quietly, reliably, and profitably. Market share that once seemed permanently American is now being rewired north of the border. The contrast is jarring. The U.S. wanted leverage. Instead, it handed its neighbor a strategic windfall. This wasn't just a shift in trade. It was a role reversal and possibly a permanent one. What do you think? Was this a wake-up call America ignored for too long? Drop your thoughts in the comments.